Let us begin. Today's daf, Be'ez Hashem, is Masechta Shavuos Daf Yud Beis, and we're discussing over here a matter that was brought up in yesterday's daf, and that is that Rab Ula said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and I have it here on the screen, is that what happens if they had a they had a pen full of carbon tomids, potential sheep that could be used as carbon tomids, and we know that the new year begins in Chodesh Nisan. So in Chodesh Nisan, they have to buy new sheep from the new monies that came in. You can't use sheep that was bought from last year's money. Hence, that's why we give the machzas a shekel around Adar time, so they'll have money in the treasury to buy new sheep for Chodesh Nisan. So if you have a leftover sheep that was dedicated to be a carbon tamid, okay, so what do you do with that? So Rabbi Yochanan said a chiddush din, and the way we came to the conclusion of our understanding of what he was saying is that these sheep, let's say there were 4 extra sheep, so these sheep are redeemed tamimim. In other words, you don't have to wait. Normally, an animal that's redeemed, it has to have a blemish first. You put it and make sure it gets a blemish first, and then only then can you redeem it. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan and says that with these tamidim, you could actually transfer their kedusha onto money, and so now the animal is no more holy, and the money has the holiness to it. With that money, by the way, they would use it for construction purposes. They use it to plate the inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So then the animal, which has no kedusha to it, is rebought from the new monies that came in, so to speak. So now, you have these carbonas. They are redeemed while they are with no blemish. Now, how does that work? The initial step of transferring the kedusha of a non-blemished animal onto money, how does that work? So the Gemara said this concept called Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim. That means that Bezdin, when they purchased this animal, right, they made a condition. What's the condition that Bezdin makes? Bezdin makes a condition that if this animal is needed for a carbon tamid, then it should have kedusha saguf, right? It has to be the highest form of kedusha. But if it's not needed as a carbon tamid, hence it's leftover carbon tamids, so then this sheep has a din like a kedusha's damen. It's like a kedusha of, let's say, a hammer or a screwdriver that belonging to the Beis Hamikdash, which you could just easily transfer kedusha to some other object. You can make a pidyon on it. So therefore, since these sheeps were not needed for the tzibor, so hence, because of that, it turns out retroactively that they only had kedusha's damim on that, and therefore the niftin tamimim, they can be redeemed while they're without blemish. So now let us go back to our page, Yud Aleph Amid Beis, Eisvei, about like 10 lines from the bottom. Eisvei. In here, what we're going to discuss over here, that not everybody agrees with that opinion. We're going to have a new opinion that says Rab Shimon is going to hold that there's no such a thing of Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim. Eisvei. Gemara asks the question. We learned in our Mishnah, and that's how this whole sugya gets into our Mishnah. Amrulai Rab Shimon Mao Shekrivu Zebazeh. If you see on the screen over here, we had a machlekes in our Mishnah of their seir pnimi. There are 4 seirim. Let's say there's a couple of seirim, goats, that we use for carbon chatases in the Beis Hamikdash, different times of the year. There's a goat on every Rosh Chodesh, seis and lechatas. Every Yontiv has a goat for a chatas. Even the Musaf of Yom Kippur has a goat. So they asked Rabbi Shimon, what happens if, let's say, the Yontiv goat was lost? Let's say the Shavuos goat was lost. And then you find it, re-enter it, and you find it before Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. Can you use it? So Rab Shimon said, yes, you could reuse it. So they asked Rab Shimon, how could you reuse it again? Rosh Chodesh goat is mechaper on one thing, and the Rosh Chodesh of Regel is mechaper on another thing. So they're bringing about atonement for two different things. So if you lost the one from Shavuos, how could you, if you find it, how could you bring it on Rosh Chodesh? So Reb Shimon answered that they're all for bringing. They were all brought for the concept of this Tumas Migdash Ukudashav. So that's what the Mishnah says. Let's see. Amrullah Rab Shimon. They told Rab Shimon, Maoshe Krivu Zebazeh. That was the Mishnah. What happens if you lost the, let's say, the seir on Shavuos? Can you bring it on Rosh Chodesh? Amalahem Yikruvu. So Rab Shimon said, yes, you can bring it on Rosh Chodesh. Amrullah. So they told Rab Shimon, how could that be? Hoyel ve'ein kaparas and shaven. Since they don't have equal kapara, they're not coming to atone for the same thing. Heichein karivin. How could you be makrivit? How could you take the Yom Tov Seir and rededicate it to be used for Rosh Chodesh? Amalehen, Kulam Boin, Rab Shimon answered, Kulam Boin Lechape al Tumas Migdash v'Kedashav. So the Kulam Boin Lechape, since initially it was to bring atonement on one type of Avera of Tumas Migdash v'Kedashav on Yom Tov, so you could bring it for Rosh Chodesh, which is a different type of Avera, but all related to Tumas Migdash v'Kedashim, where somebody brought defiled the base of Migdash or ate kachim while he was tamei. So that's what Reb Shimon said. So the question, this question doesn't even hold legs. What were they asking Reb Shimon? How could they rededicate a Yont of Seir on Rosh Chodesh? Lema, Rab Shimon should have answered, Leid Bezdin Masna Lamb. That's what Bezdin does. Bezdin, when they dedicate an animal to be used as a carbon, if it doesn't end up being used, Bezdin says you can reuse it any which way you want. So why didn't Rab Shimon answer simply, Rab Shimon should say, Leid Bezdin Masna Lamb, that if it wasn't used for Shavuos, it could be used for Rosh Chodesh. So it comes along the Gemara, Rab Shimon Karam, Rab Shimon, you say, Rab Shimon less leiv bezdin masna leim. Rab Shimon doesn't hold of this concept leiv bezdin masna leim. The Amar Avidi bar Oven, Amar of Amon, Amar of Yerchanim, Tamidim shloi hitzruchu litzibor, a tamid that was not needed for the carbon tzibor, an extra tamid. Divrei Rab Shimon ein niftim tamimim. You can never transfer the holiness of that carbon. When they bezdin set it aside for a carbon tamid, even if it turns out that you don't need it, Rab Shimon holds you don't redeem it. So what do you do with it? So this animal, according to Rab Shimon, we're going to learn, is brought next year after Nisan, Kayetz HaMizbeach, which means that you just bring it up as an oilus nadava. And when the Mizbeach was empty and wasn't busy, so there was the Chachamim made that you should bring up karbonos just for the sake that the Mizbeach should look busy. It's not nice, it's not covered for the Mizbeach to look empty. It has to be burning something. So during after Nisan, you'll bring it up as a Kayetz HaMizbeach, that sheep, but you don't redeem it. You don't redeem it while it's still unblemished. That's according to Rab Shimon, because Rab Shimon says Leiv Bezdin, he doesn't hold Leiv Bezdin Masna Leim. So the Kaddish Kedushas HaGuf, and it was dedicated to be a carbon oila, albeit it can't be brought as a tamid anymore because only tamids, karbonos chayva, have to be brought from the new monies. But a carbon that's not a chayva, for example, kayetz hamizbeach, that can be brought from something something that's left over from last year. So therefore, Rab Shimon holds to meet them that were not needed by the tzibor. You don't redeem them; you just bring them up next year as a carbon oila during slow times when the Beis Hamikdash is slow. Kayetz hamizbeach. The divrei chachamim, according to chachamim, nifdin tamimim. No, you could redeem it. You could transfer the kedusha, repurchase them back with the new monies, and use them as a carbon tamid for the new years. So now the Gemara is going to ask just a side question. Okay, Reb Shimon holds leiv bezdin masna, doesn't hold of leiv bezdin masna leim, but Rabbanim do hold leiv bezdin masna leim. Which Rabbanim? Rabbanim, the pliga, the Reb Shimon, manin, who is this Rabbanim that holds leiv bezdin masna leim? Inema, will you say the Rabbanim de Ketores? The Rabbanim that said by Ketores, we had yesterday a brisa that said if you have extra Ketores, you just redeem it without doing anything. So if that's the Rabbanim, because leiv bezdin masna leim, that if you don't need to use it for Ketairis, you could just redeem it. Wait a second, maybe we go to Amid Aleph, Shana Ketairis, the Lav Bara Iahi. Maybe Ketairis, everybody holds, could be redeemed without any mun, because it's impossible to develop a blemish on just a powdered Ketairis. You see, an animal, I will tell you, you can't just redeem it without it having a blemish, because an animal could get a blemish. But a Ketairis can never get a blemish. So therefore, everybody agrees that Ketairis could be redeemed without anything, without getting a blemish or doing something. Ella Rabbanan de Par. Maybe it's the Rabbanan of Paraduma. We learned yesterday that there's a Rabbanan that holds that, let's say they dedicated a Paraduma, and then they find a nicer Paraduma, they could just transfer the Kedusha from the first Paraduma onto money, because you found a nicer looking red Paraduma. So we see that you could just transfer Kedushas without it having a blemish. So the Gemara says, no, maybe Dilma Shana Paradumeho Yakar, because maybe the Paraduma, they allowed you to transfer Kedusha without it getting a mum, because it's very expensive. Because if it's Paraduma costs a lot of money. So if you didn't allow the transfer of Kedusha onto money, so what are they going to do? Buy another Paraduma, and then the first Paraduma, they're not going to be able to do anything with it. They're not going to be able to redeem it. It could be a loss of money. So therefore, they allowed you to redeem Paraduma even without it getting a blemish. So that's not a proof that Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim. Vela Rabbanan the Amrulai, is it the Rabbanan of our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah seems to say that they argued against Rabbi that our Rabbanan kept saying in our Mishnah that, hey, to us it makes sense that if you lose the goat from Shavuos, you can bring it on Rosh Chodesh, because we hold Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim. But you who don't hold Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim, maybe, and you hold it coming for different kedushas, you Reb Shimon, how could you bring the sa'ir that was dedicated for Shavuos onto Rosh Chodesh? If that's the Rabbanan, Mimai the Rabbi Yehudihi, V'hachi kamalei. How do you know that's the pshat in the Rabbanan, that the Rabbanan hold Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim? You're going to say there are Rabbanan, are Rabbi Yehuda. And basically, this is, you're learning pshat in the Mishnah. We say Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim. That's why if you lose the animal from Shavuos, you can bring it on to Rosh Chodesh. But according to you, who say that you don't hold Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim, then why could you bring the goat from Shavuos on to Rosh Chodesh, by Rosh Chodesh? Leiv Bezdin doesn't Masna Aleim. It was dedicated for Shavuos. How could you bring it for Rosh Chodesh? So if that's what you want to learn pshat in the Mishnah, then yes, you have a source that the rabbis of our Mishnah is the Rabbanan who hold Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim. So the Gemara says that's not necessarily true. Maybe our rabbis in our Mishnah also don't hold Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim, but basically they hold like Rameir, Dilma Rameir. Maybe our rabbis of our Mishnah hold like Rameir, and Rameir holds that every one Sa'ir Rosh Chodesh is mechaper on the same thing that Sa'ir Regalim is mechaper, which is same thing on the Sa'ir Musaf on Yom Kippur is mechaper. They're all one of the same. Here's the picture. Rameir holds they're all mechaper for all the same three types of sins of Tumas, Migdash, and Kedusha. So maybe the Hachin Kamalei, maybe this is what our Mishnah is saying. Bishlam Irim Kaparas and Shava, they're all mechaper for the same thing. Mishum Hachi Yikravu. That's why if you lose the one from Shavuos, you can bring it on to Rosh Chodesh. Eladidach Amai Yikravu. According to you, the mechaper on different things, you can't bring it from Shavuos to Rosh Chodesh. But we also hold Ein Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim. So bottom line is, the Gemara is at a loss. Who is the opinion that holds Leiv Bezdin Masna Aleim? So the Gemara answers, we really don't have a source in the Brisa. Ela Rabbi Yochanan Gemara Gamarla. He had a source of tradition. The Divrei Rab Shimon, according to Rab Shimon, a niftim, right? Those extra animals in the pen, you can't be paid them without them getting a mum. The Divrei Chachamim, there is a Chacham somewhere out there that hold niftim. You could be transfer the kedusha even on these animals prior to them getting a blemish. So now the Gemara asks, Rav Shimon, the less laid based the masna leim, my avdalhu. Point to Rav Shimon that you're not redeeming these animals, and they're leftover animals for carbon tomids, and you can't bring them as carbon tomids anymore because the new year starts in Nisan, and you have, let's say, you have 4 extra animals. What do you do with them? As I said before, you would actually Bekaitzin means you actually bring them on to the Mizbeach when the Mizbeach is not busy as a plain donation, Oila Nadava. So is the Gemara. Amar Rab Shmuel Bar Yitzchak. Rab Shmuel Bar Yitzchak said, Umaydu Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon says, B'se'ir chatas. Let's say you have a leftover se'ir chatas. How do you have a leftover se'ir chatas? Let's say you dedicated a se'ir for a chatas, for Rosh Chodesh. Then you lost it. Then they got a replacement and they found the original. What do you do with them? Can you bring that as a carbon oila? So there you can. There you have to. You can't bring it as a carbon oila. Why? Because it's a chatas. You can't transfer it into an oila. You have to turn it into money. I guess you would take this ear, put it into a pen, make sure it gets a blemish. And once it gets a blemish, then you transfer it onto money, and then you can buy another karba oila. But as is, you cannot bring it as from a chatas to a oila. Because hacha over here, by the tamidim case, the leftover carbon tamids, hu demikara oila v'hashta oila. In the beginning, it was an oilas tamid. So now, you can't use it as an oilas tamid, so you use it next year as a kayetz hamizbeach type of oila. Because the kayetz hamizbeach type of oil doesn't need to be bought from the new shkalim, so therefore you're keeping the name as an oila. Al hasan, but over there by a lost seir that was dedicated as a chatas, the bikara chatas v'hashta oila. You want it first; it was a chatas. Now it's an oila. So you're going to tell me what's wrong? Change it into an oila. I already brought the chatas because remember you got this chatas because the seir Rosh Chodesh was lost, and then you brought a replacement, and now you want to use this as an oila, the one that you refound, the original one. That technically could work, but we say gezeira la'acha kapara or lifnei kapara. If we allow you to change a chatas to an oila after you brought atonement, you brought a replacement, I might think that you're allowed to change a chatas to an oila prior to you bringing a replacement. And people say, okay, we dedicate it as a chatas, let's bring it as an oila. But if you didn't replace the chatas by bringing a chatas to take its stead, if you just change it into an oila, it becomes a puzzle of carbon. So therefore, a chatas never changes for an oila. And now the Gemara brings 3 proofs to that theory. Again, Rab Shimon says, you don't say leid bez the masna lamb. However, if it's a carbon chatas, and therefore the carbon oila could be re-brought as an oila, if in another scenario, but if it was originally a carbon chatas, you can't change it into an oila. Amar Abaya Afana Nami Tanina, we have a brisa. It says the same idea. Par v'sar shel Yom Kippurim. You have the cow or the goat of Yom Kippur, sha'avdu, that got lost. The hifresh acherem tachteim, and you brought a replacement. V'chein se'iri avodah zarah, a goat that was brought as an avodah zarah to atone avodah zarah for the Jewish people. Sha'avdu, that got lost. The hifresh acherem tachteim, and you brought another one to take its place, and then you find the original. Kulim yamusu. Divrei Yehuda holds halacha l'maishim will tell you that you take the original goat, put it into a locked room, and starve it to death. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, I'm not sure. Yiru achi yistavi, you let it graze until it gets a mum. Yiru means let it graze achi yistavu until it gets a mum. V'yamachru, then you sell it. V'yiplum d'meim dava, and then you could buy a carbon nedava and oila. She'ein chatas tzibar mesa. You don't have to kill a chatas tzibar. So the question is, fine, but why do I have to wait till you graze until it gets a mum? Bring it directly as an oila. Since you already brought a replacement, why don't you change this chatas now into an oila? We have a proof to what we were saying before. If we allowed you to do it after you find a replacement, you might do this before you find a replacement, and then you're going to be passing a carbon. Same, another proof. Amarav Rav said, we learned the same idea. Here it's talking about the two goats on Yom Kippur that you made a goyrel on, right? Let's say one of the goats died. So now you have to remake a goyrel, and you brought another two goats to make a goyrel again. So now let's say the Sari Lazazel died, okay? So you remake another goyrel. So you're gonna have one Sari Azazel and two Sari Pinimis. What do you do with the extra Sari Pinimi? That was a chatas. You brought an extra one. So Raisa says, the second one, Yira Achistav, the one of the goats, you let it get a mum, you graze it until it gets a mum, and then you sell it and let the money fall as an oila. Let's just bring the Sarya Panimi, one of the Sarya Panimi, since we have two of them now, bring that Sarya Panimi as a regular oila. We don't change it. If it was originally brought as a chatas, you can't switch it to an oila. I always have a gezerah that maybe if we allowed you to do this after you find a replacement, you might do it before you find a replacement. Ravina said, we have the same brisa. You have a carbon asham that the owner who was supposed to bring this carbon asham died, or he found another one and brought a kapara. Now this is an extra asham. What do? You again let it get a blemish and then bring it as a carbon. The money with the money you buy as an oiler. So you first turning the asham into money, and then you bringing it as a carbon oiler. No, you just kill that carbon asham. Rab Shimon agrees with the Tanakama. Yavi bedam of oiler. Says the Gemara, same question. You have an asham. You don't need it to use it as an asham. Bring it as an oiler by directly. Why do you have to transfer it into money? We don't allow you to directly bring it as an oiler because it's a chatas or it's an asham. So we want you first to transfer it into money and then buy another carbon. Because if we allow you to do this after you find a replacement, you might do it before you find a replacement. Say, you know what, let me bring it as an oiler, and then you're passing the carbon. Shema mina, that's proof. Tanya nami hacha, we learned in a brisa. Rab Shimon said that, let's say the extra animals for carbon tamids, what did you do with them? You brought them as kayitz hamizbeach. Now the word kayitz means figs. It's like a white figs that was used for the dessert in the time of the Mishnayos. So the Gemara misunderstood what that meant. Tanya nami hacha, my hein meviyim en amoisus. What did you do with those extra animals that for tamids that you didn't need to use them anymore? So according to Rab Shimon, you can't redeem them. So kayitz kibnoi shuach lamizbeach. So the Brisa says use it for kayitz as a dessert, like you use white figs for the mizbeach. So the Gemara understood that what you do is transfer the kedusha of this animal onto white figs, and then put the white figs, these fruits, onto the mizbeach. So the Gemara says we're on Amid Beis, but the pasuk says you can't bring a fruit on the mizbeach. You can't bring anything sweet on the mizbeach. You can't throw yeast on the mizbeach or a fruit on the mizbeach. So what does that mean? You use this animal as a white fig. Tana Rav Chanina explained, that like a white fig for a human, just like when you use white figs, which is a healthy type of dessert, and you use it after you eat a good meal. So we're using these animals as a dessert after you bring the obligatory karbanos. The tzibur will bring, when the mizbeach is not busy, these extra donation karbanos for the mizbeach. So that's what kayitz hamizbeach means. Now the Gemara says, Darash Rav Nachman Rav Chizda. Rav Nachman Rav Chizda gave a speech and said, Ein mekaitzim ba'oil soif. When the mizbeach is not busy, you bring an animal as an extra, keep it busy. But you don't bring a bird as a carbon to keep it busy. So you don't keep it busy with a bird. You have to use an animal. That's called kayitz hamizbeach. Amar Rava says, Haburcha, that must be a joke. Why can't I bring a bird? If the Mizbeach is not busy, bring a bird. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, the Rava, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Rava, my bruchasa, why is it a joke? Ano Amrisin Elei, I told this Rav Nachman, this teaching, and I said it in the name of Rab Shimi from Nardoi. The Amir Rab Shimi min Nardoi. Rab Shimi from Nardoi says, Moisras nidvas tzibar azle. You for the extra of the donations of the tzibur. Let's say you have an extra carbon tamid, then you bring it for kayetz hamizbeach. And Rab Shimi taught us, you don't bring an oilus and oif as a tzibur. The tzibur does not bring an oilus and oif. So there's no birds as brought as kayetz hamizbeach. Now the Gemara says, Va'ash Shmuel sav Rabbi Yochanan. Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yochanan, who holds like Rabbi Shimon, who explained Rabbi Shimon that when you have extra leftover nidvas tzibur, it is brought for kayetz hamizbeach. Even though it was originally for one thing, you're bringing it for something else, as long as it's within the same name. If it's an oilus tzibur and you're bringing it as kayetz oilus tzibur, that's fine. When you slaughtered it, you decide what you want it to be used for. So originally, if something was dedicated as a carbon tamid, and now you can't use it because it's the next year, so it was dedicated for an oila. So when you slaughter it as kayetz hamizbeach, that will decide what it was meant to be used. Tanya name hachi. We learned in the same brisa. Moider Rab Shimon b'Sa'ir. Here we're talking about the goat. It was a chatas, okay? And you're keeping it as a chatas, not changing it for an oila. Shem loikar b'regel. If you didn't bring the seir chatas on Yom Tov, yikrav b'Rosh Chodesh. You could bring it on Rosh Chodesh. Vim loikar b'Rosh Chodesh. Let's say you didn't bring it on Rosh Chodesh. Yikrav b'Yom Kippur. You bring it on Yom Kippur. Vim loikar b'Yom Kippur. Yikrav b'regel. If you didn't bring it on Yom Kippur, you can bring it on Sukkot. Vim loikar b'regel zeh. V'kar b'regel acha. Then you can bring it on another Yom Tov. In other words, since you're keeping it as a chatas, even though it's coming for a different time, you originally, let's say, dedicated for regel, a chatas for regel, and now you're using it for Rosh Chodesh, or if you're using it for Rosh Chodesh, it was dedicated for Rosh Chodesh, and you're using it for Yom Kippur, it's fine. It was originally only supposed to use for the Mizbeach HaChitzon, and you're keeping it as a chatas, that is fine. Okay, one more piece of the Gemara. Half a minute. We said, and we kept repeating this yesterday, that the seir that was brought on Yom Kippur on the inside, not only is mechaper on if you do a mistake, but it's also if you do it on purpose. If someone b'mezid walks into the Beis Hamikdash when he's tamei, and then has tshuva, so obviously you don't bring a carbon. This sa'ir that was brought on Yom Kippur for the inside of the Beis Hamikdash, sa'ir apnimi, that brought about kapara. How do I know that? The that the sa'ir pnimi brings about a kapara from pisheim. The pasuk doesn't the goymer, but it says from negligence. Pishoyim eila hamaradim. Pishoyim means you do something lahachis to on purpose. The chaynu oimer, we see the word pesha means melech b'boya pashabi. The king of Moav rebelled against me. Oimer, and there's another pasuk that says oz tifsha livna be'esahi. Livna rebelled against me. Chatas elu shagogas v'chaynu oimer nefesh kisechta b'shaga. So this sa'ir apnimi, we'll conclude here, is mechaper in two things. One, if you did it by mistake, and two, if you did it on purpose. Obviously, if you did it by mistake, is that you don't know you did anything wrong. You knew you were tamei, you went into the Beis Hamikdash, and never realized that you were metame the Beis Hamikdash. So this sa'ir pnimi brought about a protection. But even if you did it on purpose, mipishayem, and therefore you're not required to bring a carbon, the sa'ir pnimi brought about a kapara. Okay, we'll stop here.